Welcome back. In this video, you are going to learn how to get data from a website by using an HTTP request, which will be done asynchronously, and then use that data, which will be in the JSON format, in order to display the data in your application. So we're just gonna use it to display it in the logcat, not directly in the UI, but it's really just not that much of a hassle. If you understand what's going on in this video, you can do that easily. And of course, we're going to see that in projects later on, especially when we build our weather app. And then of course in our Firebase example, because Firebase also uses this same approach. So they also use JSON in order to display the data or store the data correctly. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what we have here. So first of all, we need those two permissions here, access network state and internet. Then we need to have this line here, uses clear text traffic. This allows us to access websites such as this Mocky website, because otherwise this just will not work. So we will not be able to access the website and get the data from there. And then I have this dialog custom progress, which is just this progress bar with a text view. So that's basically this thing that you can see here. We have used that quite a bit already. And then in Activity Main, I just have this text view, which just says hello world, because we're not gonna really do anything with the text view, because we're gonna log the data. And then let's go to our main activity, because here what we will need is an inner class, which will be our async class. So I'm gonna create a new private inner class. And I'm gonna call this one call API login async task. All right, and this will be an async task. So any void and string is what we need to add here for this async task. And then of course you need to import async task and implement its members. So for now, we're just going to implement do in background. And then I will create a little object here, which will allow me to create a custom dialog. So private init or late init here, var custom progress dialog, which will be a dialog. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to add those two methods in here. So you can of course copy them from the project itself as well. So what we have is our show progress dialog and cancel progress dialog. So two methods. This one will just show this layout that we prepared, this one here, and the other one will cancel it, so it will dismiss it. Okay, because what I want to do is I want to display this dialog as soon as the download starts. So pretty much on pre-execute, I want to display it. So here on pre-execute, you can see we have this super on pre-execute. So that will be executed, this code, just before whatever is in do in background will be started. So just before we connect to the internet. Okay, so here I'm just gonna show progress dialog. All right, and then there is another one which is on post execute. So once the execution of the thing that we want to run in the background, which is in our case connecting to the internet, there I want to finish this whole progress dialog. So here, cancel progress dialog. And here I will also, of course, work with the data that is the result string. So you can see we get a result. So before we get that result, let's do something in the background. Okay, so what we need to do in the background is to return a string. And in order to do that, we of course first of all need to have a string. So I'm going to create this var result, which will be of type string. And then I need to establish a connection. So I'm going to establish a connection, which will be of type HTTP URL connection. All right, this one will be a nullable, and I'm going to assign null to it because I want to establish the connection later on. I don't want to do it directly here. So something could go wrong. That's why I create this try and catch block, because each time you try to establish a connection, for example, the user could not have internet, or we could try to access the internet even though we don't have the permission, and so forth. All right, so in here, I'm just going to use an URL, which is going to be a URL object, and I need to import that. And here, by the way, we're going to use the Java one. And I'm going to use this URL that you can see here. So you can create your very own URL. You saw how to do that in the last video. Just use Mocky here, create one or create a link here that you can then use, and then use that link in your application. So here you need to paste it in. It needs to be a string, this URL, and whatever you pass into the URL, and then you can establish a connection. So we can say connection should be URL open connection as HTTP URL connection. Okay, so what we had here. So we can make sure that it really will be an HTTP URL connection, and now we can use that connection. All right, so this connection, you can define some properties here. For example, do input and do output. So in our case, do input, I'm gonna set that to true, and do output as well. So do input is, do we get data, or do output is, do we send data? So I'm just gonna set both to true, and this is only necessary if you really want to also send data, because by default, do input will be true and do output will be false. Okay, so in this case, I'm just gonna set both of them to true, just to show you both of those properties. All right, before I show you how to send data, let's look at how we can receive data. So val HTTP result is going to be of type integer, and it will be the connection dot response code. So you get a response code, which is very similar to what we have seen here in Mocky. You can see here the status code. You get a response code which contains the status code as well. All right, so we can now check if the status code is 200. So how do we do that? Well, we do HTTP result is HTTP URL connection dot HTTP underscore OK. So what is this HTTP underscore OK? Well, it's the static final int 200. So it's the status code 200, which means OK. So we have a connection and it worked out. Okay, as you can see here in HTTP URL connection, you have all of these static final integers. So that's basically constants. All right. So what we're saying here is the HTTP result 200? It's the same thing, but maybe sometime someone will decide to change the numbers and then it would not work anymore. So in this case, it's good to use the correct approach, which is to get it from the HTTP URL connection class. All right, so now that we have established a connection, we want to read the data from the website that we have. And in order to, well, in this case, from this website here. So in order to do so, what we need is an input stream, and it will be based on the connection dot input stream. So we get it from the connection again. Now we can create a reader. So reader will be a buffered reader, and it needs the, and of course need to import that again. So let's import that real quick, and then input stream reader needs to be passed here, and here we need to pass our input stream. All right, so this is our reader, and now we can use the reader in order to read every single line. But the thing is, we first of all need to have a string builder, which makes string out of whatever we get as data there. So val string builder will be our string builder object, which will allow us to build strings. And then we can go ahead and go through every single line, but therefore I'm just going to create a line variable, which will be a string nullable. So the thing is, this can go wrong again, so we have another try here, and what we say is while the reader still has something to read, so read line, and also the line is equal to it is not equal null, then we can append that to the string builder. So string builder append the current line plus a line break. So now this try can of course go wrong. So let's have a catch here with an IO exception. So input output exception, because we're using input streams and so forth, right? And then here I'm just gonna say e print stack trace. And finally, what I will try to do is to close the input stream. So here I'm gonna try again, because here something can go wrong again. When closing and opening, everything can go wrong here. And we catch that with another IO exception. IO exception. All right, and again, I'm just gonna print the stack trace here. So this one here. So now we had something called result here, right? So doing background is going to return a result, which is going to be a string. So at this point, we get all of this data from the lines, and we have the string builder, which appends the data all the time. And now we can go ahead and get that string builder and return that to our result. So here we can go ahead and say result should be our string builder to string. And here to string. So it's going to make a string out of whatever it had in it itself. As you can see, it appended the lines. So it went through the website line by line. In our case, it went through it with this line, then the next line, then the next line, until there were no lines anymore. So basically it just loaded this whole set of strings. So basically this is just a text, right? This whole thing, even though we say JSON and everything to it, but it's just a string. It's just one text. So the result here will be the whole text, just as one string. And by the way, all of that was in this if statement. So if the URL connection was okay. So what shall happen if it was not okay? Well, what I'm just gonna say is the result should be connection response message. So whatever we got as a response message, for example, bad request or not able to connect or whatever the result will be, we will get that as a result and we will then later on display it. Okay, so here we still have this other try block that we had. So here, this is the try, and we get an error here because it's expecting the catch block here as well. So let's catch the errors that potentially could arise, and one of them is the socket timeout exception. So we tried to connect it to it, but for some reason the internet connection wasn't good enough or something like that. So in this case, I'm just gonna set the result to connection timeout. And then in another catch case, which is the general exception, so just an exception here, I'm just gonna say, all right, the result should be something like error, and then whatever the error was. So plus e.message. So whatever the error message then was here. And finally, I will disconnect a connection. So disconnect. If there is a connection, then disconnect, and if there is none, then just don't do anything. That's what we do here with this question mark. And then finally, you can see it's still complaining here because this whole do in background requires a string to be returned. So now let's return that string. Let's go ahead and return our result, which is the string that we pretty much filled up with all the relevant information. Now at this point, we have gone through everything that we needed in order to get the data from the website in terms of a string. So now we just have this string, which is the result of our do in background. And then in our onPost execute, we get the result back as a string again. In this case, it's a nullable. But what we can do now with this is to use the result in order to display it. So let's log it, log I. And here I'm going to just say JSON response result will be the result. And we need to import log here. So let's do that real quick. import a log. Okay, at this point we can already test it. So this will happen straight when we start our application. It will start this, and by the way, we cannot test it. It would work by itself, but of course we need to create an object of our call API async task here, because otherwise it won't do anything. So in our onCreate in the main activity, let's create an object of our call API login async task. And of course .execute. So we need to execute this task here. All right, now let's run it again. And for a very quick moment, barely seeable, it was there. So now let's go to the logcat and now let's search for JSON. And what we will see is that we have received this response here. So you can see JSON response result, and here it starts, and then that's the whole result. You have successfully logged in, user ID, and so forth. So now you know how you can connect to the internet and download something from a page. Okay, and that is just the first step to seeing everything with the JSON format. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. We're going to break it down into JSON objects with the old-fashioned way, and then later on we will see how we can use JSON in order to make the whole thing that we're going to do in the next video a lot easier. But I think it's still important to understand the basics of it before we go into using third-party libraries, because who knows how long they're going to work, or if they're going to be changed or deprecated or whatever. It's always good to know the general approach and understand that. All right, so see you in the next video.